My name is Heath Elliott. I'm the Senior Director for Development and Alumni Relations here at the school. And I work with my colleagues on engaging alumni, not just here in Baltimore, but throughout the world. And we are starting some new initiatives related to that, and this is the result of some of that planning. We hope to invite more alumni to engage with students and faculty here at this school through sessions like the ones that we've planned today. So this is, I think it's fair to say, our first spring alumni day. We've done something like this in the past in the fall, and we'll do another one yet again this coming fall. But as you heard Dean Clagg say, we are particularly proud of our alumni. In fact, we think of you as our global alumni network. And the reason that we do is because between our alumni, students, and faculty, we are in 120 countries around the world. I don't think it would be too far of a stretch to suggest that we are probably the largest network working in public health today, particularly if you add in, as we heard from the dean, all the folks who've been exposed to our teaching through the online courses. So it is a significant footprint. Now, you might be interested to know, and maybe perhaps not too surprised, that about a quarter of our alumni are right here in the Maryland area. We have, best account, graduated about 50,000 alumni since the school was first founded. We have about 20,000 currently living. So a major portion of those that have graduated are still actively working in public health. To give you a sense of how broad our alumni network is, 5,000 here in Maryland, the next biggest population would be, domestically, any guesses? California, exactly, very good. Just over 1,200 in California. And then in descending order, about 1,000 in Virginia, 800 in the New York area, and then Pennsylvania comes in fifth. Internationally, the greatest concentration of our alumni are in India and Taiwan, fairly close, about 300 in each of those countries, 160 in Nigeria. China has about 150. And then interestingly, we have just as many alumni in England as we have in Kentucky at 43. Now, I caution to say that we're not exactly sure where all of our alumni are because we don't have accurate records for all of our alumni. Now, it's partly due to the fact that our alumni are so mobile. So recent graduates are often out in the field working in different places, perhaps 2 or 3 countries in a 2-year span. So one of the things that we want to do is, as the dean said, is try to find more ways to engage you so that you'll want to stay in touch with the school. You'll want to remain involved and therefore want to share your contact information. And we need it for several reasons. We need it so that we can make sure we know where you are, how to reach you, how to put perhaps prospective students in touch with you or alumni who've just graduated with you, but we also need it for accrediting purposes too, so that we can survey you. And we not only want to survey you about your experience here at this school, but we also want to survey you and get your feedback and inputs on everything from the Centennial logo, which I hope you'll vote on if you haven't had a chance, to giving us insights into the kind of programming, the kind of information that you want from us, and how we can engage you more. I just want to quickly introduce, in case you have not met, some of my colleagues who are working on this effort with me. Jimmy Lou DeBakey is our Director of Constituent Relations, working with alumni and friends of the school. And then up front, 2 of her colleagues, Morgan Martin and Allison Hardy. So you will hear a lot more from them. Just want to thank you for being here. And my role is to introduce our Master of Ceremonies, who then in turn will introduce our speakers. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. D.A. Henderson. He is our Dean Emeritus and a fellow alum. For you, class of 1960 is when he got his MPH. He was Dean of the School of Public Health from 1977 to 1990. Dr. Henderson came to Hopkins after directing the World Health Organization's global smallpox eradication campaign and was instrumental in initiating the WHO's global program of immunization, which has vaccinated 80% of the world's children on 6 major diseases. He's currently the resident scholar at the Center for Biosecurity at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which was established to increase national and international awareness of the medical and public health threats posed by biological weapons. Additionally, he is the Johns Hopkins University Distinguished Service Professor and has a joint appointment here in epidemiology. He is the recipient of many honors and many awards. I want to highlight just a few. He's received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He is also a member of the Institute of Medicine, a fellow in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and holds honorary degrees from 17 universities. I hope they're not all asking you for annual donations. He received his undergraduate degree from Oberlin and his medical degree from the University of Rochester. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. D.A. Henderson.
Well, it's a very great pleasure for me to be here and to have an opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts. And we've got an interesting panel here of people who have found different experiences in public health as they moved along. And I think as we all have looked at our careers, we find that we've all wound up in public health by very strange directions. And I think as I meet with a variety of students, they keep worrying about what am I going to do and trying to find an ultimate path very quickly. And it doesn't always work quite that way, as we all find out. Whatever, that introduction is a bit of a problem. I think if I looked at that CV of that individual and would say, are you interested in hiring him? And I would say, God, he can't hold a job very long. And you'd toss that aside very quickly. But at any rate, for various reasons, I've changed jobs, and it hasn't all been my fault. We did have a problem back in 1976 that here I was, I'd become an international expert in a disease, smallpox. And I knew that, and I was there. And then we were running out of smallpox cases. Now, can you imagine, you're the international expert on a disease and it's just about gone? Can you, as a cardiologist, imagine waking up some morning and find there are no hearts out there? I mean, what do you do? So here I was with no marketable skills. And so what did I do? I became a dean. So with that as, I don't know whether that's a word of advice or what, but I should tell you very briefly as a prelude of how I wound up in public health, which is, I think, strangely, as I think everybody, most of my colleagues do. I'd had no interest at all in public health. I went through medical school. I was going to be a cardiologist, and went through an internship, and that was up in Cooperstown at the Bassett Hospital. And suddenly there was a call that we had to serve military duty. Well, you had to go to uniform service. So you could volunteer for any one of these, Navy, Air Force, Army, or Public Health Service. And somebody shows up and was from CDC. I had no idea what CDC was. None of the staff knew what CDC was. Well, at that time, it didn't have a main building in Atlanta, believe it or not. So really, it was pretty innocuous, and this guy was something called the Epidemic Intelligence Service. Well, I'd been thinking, what was I going to do if I'm drafted and I've got an internship and I really don't know much about medicine? What am I likely to wind up doing? Probably entry-level physical examinations on troops. I thought, oh man, I couldn't think of anything that would be more dull. And I thought, well, here's something in infectious disease, which I wasn't interested in really, but at least it would be maybe learn something. So I volunteered, and so I was in the epidemic intelligence. I got drafted for the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which was very good. We then took a 1-month course, which was given by people from Johns Hopkins for 1 month. At the end of the time, you had your epidemiology and your biostatistics. So you're then pronounced an epidemiologist at that point. And so we had an epidemic of diphtheria, and I was gone for a month. And I volunteered to be assistant director of EIS. It was called the gopher job. You sort of do the routine stuff and setting up meetings and so forth. So I thought, well, maybe it'd be interesting. I'll be around. We'll learn something. So I got back from 5 weeks in the epidemic, and I saw, here's the chief EIS officer packing his bags. And I said, where are you going? He said, I've got a new job. I'm health commissioner for Alabama. And I said, well, what do I do? And he said, well, you must be the new chief EIS officer. I said, I don't even know how to get around the building, let alone what the files are. He said, oh, you'll learn, don't worry. So de facto, I wound up with a man by the name of Alex Langmuir, who'd been associate professor here, who basically was responsible for founding this whole operation of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, the first physician at CDC at that time. And he was a tiger, a tyrant, one of the great teachers. And the end of 2 years, any thought of cardiology was out of the hand, and that's when I decided this is a career. It's just too much fun. And so I never left. So with all of that planning ahead, it really, so many things happened by chance. And I happened to have a very fortunate circumstance, and it worked out awfully well. So what we will have are 20-minute presentations now from each of our 3 distinguished people who have been graduated from here and found their way into very interesting careers, which they will be talking about. And then after they make their presentation, we will all come up here and you'll be able to ask questions. So there'll be a Q&A after they finish. And so with that, let me begin by introducing the first speaker is Steffany Moonaz, who's graduated with a PhD in 2010. I think very clever that she was working as a research assistant for 8 years in rheumatology and sort of helped shape a new department of health, behavior, and society, and then wound up getting a doctoral degree. That's a very good way to do it, I think. And so graduated in that and has been very active in the wellness area, which I think is really, as we all know, has begun to take on a very new and different feeling. And so she's director of health coaching for Corporate Health Solutions, and that's all wellness programs for different companies. She's the associate academic director of integrative health sciences at the Maryland University of Integrative Health, and she does training of yoga teachers. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Moonaz.
Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to turn this thing left or right because I don't, oh, there it is. I don't remember now. Thank you. So forgive me, I'm going to wander. So I've heard that sitting is the new smoking. I think standing still is the new nicotine patch. And I'm a little short for this podium. So I started dancing when I was 3 years old. I bet you don't hear a lot of speeches start with a sentence like that in this building, but it's relevant. So I had a lot of experiences in my youth. My mother was a dance teacher, and that's how I ended up in creative rhythm classes. And as I got older, I got more serious about it, and I ended up spending many of my after-school hours in the dance studio. And I noticed that however I felt when I walked into the studio, I felt differently when I walked out. And I also had a keen interest in the sciences and in health. And I was starting to think about the overlap between those interests. I wanted to better understand what was happening when I was in the studio. What was that experience all about? What was happening in my brain? What was happening in my body? How was that all connected? And how could I help other people to have that experience? I was interested in becoming a doctor. I wanted to help people feel well. So I graduated from high school after taking a whole lot of advanced science courses, and I went to Oberlin College. I went to Oberlin College because of a brochure that I got in the mail that said, you might think this is a bad way to pick a college, but it actually worked out. It had a picture of the world on it. It was all black, and it said, think one person can change the world, so do we, Oberlin. And I thought, all right, well, I'm at least reading the brochure. I'm not going to put it in the trash with all of the others, and everything I read interested me, and everything I saw when I visited interested me. And I find it interesting that I graduated from the world changing one person at a time to the world changing millions at a time. So I went through Oberlin, and I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to stop doing all of this dancing, and I'm going to get serious about preparing to be a doctor. So I was pre-med, and I majored in neuroscience. I thought, well, that's where I'm going to understand what happens in the studio in neuroscience. And I quickly realized that the neuroscience department is not a great place for a vegan. And also, maybe eventually in neuroscience you can learn things like what happens when you're in a dance studio, but certainly not in the beginning stages. And I just was not, I was bored. And I found my way into biology, which I found to be much more interesting. And I thought, you know, while I'm here, they have a dance department, I should take a dance class. Well, I didn't take one dance class, I took 30, and I ended up with a major. But I've heard that medical schools are very interested in people who study the arts, so I thought this is a really good thing. So I'll continue taking my science classes, and I'll take these dance classes, and I'll be even more marketable, and my parents are thinking, what's all this dancing about? We thought you were going to be a doctor. So I did a thesis there, a thesis project looking at how Descartes was misunderstood and what the connections of the mind and the body have been thought to be over the years, and what that has to do with our disembodied society. And actually, the concert of that, the practical application of that study was, oh no, this was in my master's degree. It all blurs together. But I continued that same line of thinking in my master's degree, where I used furniture as props for dance, because furniture a lot of times keeps us sedentary, and I used furniture to be mobile. But anyway, so I was looking at this overlap, and I still wanted to be a doctor. I moved out to California with a boyfriend, with actually a group of, it was really fun, a group of 6 kids from Oberlin, and all in a house in the Bay Area, and I needed a job out there. And we're talking about aha moments here. I've had a lot of them, and the thread through my experience has really been serendipity. that so many times along the way, things just happened. Like that brochure just showed up in the mail. I hadn't even heard of Oberlin, and it turned out to be just right. And I moved out to the Bay Area for a boyfriend that didn't work out, but I ended up getting connected through my boyfriend's mother with the head of the Children's Hospital Research Institute. And I got a job working on a study looking at cord blood transplantation for pediatric conditions. And not only did I learn a whole lot about research and the application of science in medicine, we saved quite a few lives. It was a pretty powerful experience. I never really had very much interest in research. I thought research was for people who didn't have people skills, that like needed to be in a room with a whole bunch of data instead of interacting. I thought that would be really dull. But that was the introduction. Of course, I had some of that in undergrad, but I really got interested in it in California. Still wanted to be a doctor. But I started to realize that what I really wanted to do, why I really wanted to be a doctor, was to help people live differently. And there are probably I know some exceptions to that in this room, but many doctors don't really get to help people live differently in the 7 minutes they get to talk to them once a year. So I was trying to figure all of this out, and I thought, well, what I really need to do is grow up. And what better way to grow up than to go back to school for dance? No, really, I was really thinking about this, that it was through the arts that I evolved as a person, that it's a process of self-discovery. There are many very powerful people who have studied the arts, and I wouldn't say that they think of it as having been a waste of time. So much to my parents' dismay, I went back to school for dance. I got a master's degree in choreography and continued that exploration of the mind-body problem. But I thought, I still have to be involved in science because I'm going to go into medicine or something like that, and I don't want it to look like I've just been dancing around for 3 years. So I started looking for internships. And here's another serendipitous moment. My CV ends up posted on a bulletin board in the basement of Bayview through some strange series of events, and someone sees that I have a certification in Laban movement analysis, which most people don't know what that is, but somebody walked past my CV and knew what it was and thought it might be useful. So I got a job completely unrelated to that, doing a summer internship, and I'm sitting in the office one day. We were working on cells and culture with herbs, and the person who was supervising me poked her head in and said, you're interested in dance and movement, and I think you should write a paper about how movement could help people with rheumatoid arthritis. And I thought, I don't really know what rheumatoid arthritis is, but okay. And that was another serendipitous moment, because I wrote that paper, and it ended up in a drawer in a computer file, and I finished my master's degree, and I thought, I wonder if this paper is any good. I didn't really know very much about rheumatoid arthritis. I certainly don't know a whole lot about scientific writing, but I'm going to send it to the chair of rheumatology and say, listen, I'm not really a scientist. This paper might suck. Should I throw it away, or should I do something with it? So she forwarded it to someone else in the department, and I was called in for a meeting. And there was another serendipitous moment, because she said, my research assistant is leaving, and I just took my first yoga class, and I see, there's information about yoga in this paper, and you're a dancer and also a yoga teacher. Yoga was the first time I actually enjoyed exercise, and I think it might be helpful for our patients who need to exercise and can't really find something that works for them. So how about this? Come to work for me as my research assistant. And by that point, I had discovered public health. I realized medicine might not be a way to help change the way people live, but public health could be that. And I knew that there was this emerging department about health behavior, and that was what really interested me. So she said, well, you could be here at Hopkins as my research assistant and go to the best public health school in the country, and your dissertation could be the effects of yoga for people with rheumatoid arthritis. And I said, okay, sure. So that's what I did. So I was her research assistant for a whole lot of behavioral studies. So I started learning a whole lot about behavioral research with her and a few other scientists in the department. And we started this study together, and I'm waiting for this health, behavior, and society department to start. So I start taking the classes that I know I'm going to need, that are going to transfer when I finally start in this department, and we get a little bit of seed money from Hopkins, and then we get a little more. And something interesting happened in the 10 years that I was at Hopkins in various roles. Everything we applied for, we got. Everything. So every student preceptorship, every NIH grant, every private foundation grant, it was like, oh, and now we have a little bit more money. And now you have money to go take that training. And now you have money to go to that conference. And now we have money to add another site. And now we have money to bring in another instructor and add more measures. And it was like, wow, this is easy. And my mentor, who I had incredible mentoring, she said, this will stop. It won't always be this easy. You won't get everything you apply for. You're bright, but you're not that bright. And she was right, it did stop, but not for a long time. So we ended up doing this randomized controlled trial, and Marie Diener West was on my committee, and she's just wonderful. Especially because what I was most nervous about was the statistics. I'm an artist. And my mentor said, you know, if you have somebody on your committee from statistics, then they won't press you as hard on the statistics. Because they know somebody on your committee helped make sure the statistics were right. And I was taking a class with Marie, and I just thought she was such a remarkable teacher, and she made it all make sense. And I thought, I'm a little bit intimidated to ask her, because I bet everybody asks her, because she's such a great teacher, and she's the head of the department. But the reverse psychology might be maybe a lot of people are intimidated to ask her. And so if I ask her, maybe she doesn't get a lot of people asking, and she might say yes, which she did, and I'm grateful to that. So we did this great study, and I finished, and I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to continue. I'm going to do a postdoc, and that's kind of what people do. And I started looking at the lives of the women in academia that I knew. At this point, I had had my first child. I got married and got married, had a kid in a very short time. That's another interesting story that I can tell you over beers sometime. So now I'm a mother, and I'm thinking, you know, academia is really interesting, but what kind of a lifestyle, if I'm thinking about changing people's lives, what kind of a life is that going to be for me? And I saw that no matter what stage you were in your career, it was always a little bit of a struggle. And I wanted more stability, and I wanted to be at my daughter's 4 p.m. drama showing. So I'm second guessing this whole life in academia thing, and interestingly enough, that's when the opportunities started falling away. So I applied for a whole lot of things that I didn't get. One of them even, I was supposed to do a postdoc through the Arthritis Foundation, who has been incredibly supportive of me, and they told me I was a shoo-in for this postdoc, and then the postdoc went away. Like it just disappeared. They restructured, it no longer existed. And that kind of thing started to get me thinking, like, maybe I'm on the wrong path here. And at that time, my father, who's in mental health, had started doing this corporate wellness work. And I was really interested in what he was doing, because he was going to the work site once a year and talking with people about their lives and their risk. And I said, Dad, you can't just go once a year. I'm learning all this stuff about health behavior change, and it's not going to work that way. You have to catch them when they're ready. You know, maybe when the day you show up is not the day that they know they want to quit smoking. And he said, okay, well, then why don't you come and do it? And I did. So I joined his team. He and a physician partner have this amazing company, Corporate Health Solutions, that does this work with a handful of self-insured companies around the country. One of which is SCA Tissue, which is the second most environmentally friendly company in the country, and I was happy to see SCA Tissue in the Johns Hopkins bathroom. So in this corporate world, I'm boots on the ground. I'm loving that work. And while I'm doing that, this dissertation that I've started has taken on a life of its own. So there are these yoga teachers and yoga researchers and people with arthritis who are contacting me from all over the world saying, I really want to practice yoga, and where can I find a teacher, and where can I find a training? And I thought, well, I have to do this because I'm like that person now. So I started training yoga teachers. So I'm doing that work. I'm training yoga teachers to work with people who have arthritis. I didn't know anything about arthritis at all, and now I know a whole lot about how to help people live differently who have it. So I'm doing that work, and in that work, I came across this university. There's this whole movement called yoga therapy that's emerging that is the therapeutic application of yoga, different from going to a studio or a YMCA and taking a yoga class. And in that evolution of the field, there's a university in Columbia, Laurel, Maryland, that I didn't know about that has started the first Masters of Science in Yoga Therapy in the country, and I thought, I have to be there. And as I talked to them more, I realized, well, not only do they also have, I think, the first Masters of something in health coaching, which I now do, but they are looking to increase the academic rigor where they are. So I'm teaching statistics. Believe it or not, I'm teaching statistics. So I'm helping people understand how to look at the science, how to read the science, which I also help to do in the boardroom. I help to do that in the corporate world, and I help to do that in the world of complementary and alternative medicine. So I guess what I can say, similar to what DA's story told, is that I could not have set out to create this path that I have been on. What I could do is be open to opportunities that showed up in front of me and be willing to consider a different way of going about things. And I'm a yoga teacher, so I believe in more than just chance. I think there's something for the serendipity, something about doors being opened or closed at certain times in our lives. And I feel grateful that I've been able to be open to what's showed up at my door along the way. So thank you. I'll turn this off now. Am I off? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Steffany. It's certainly not a blueprint for anybody else to follow. I think the message here is there are no blueprints, I think, at all here. The next two speakers were at Hopkins at an unusually fine time when the university or the school was in an extraordinary time because they had an extraordinary dean there at that point, and who will remain nameless. But let me introduce Elin Gursky, who is a good friend and with whom I've had the opportunity to work with since she got into her field of studies, which are really unusual in a way. She was working with a company called Answer, which I only found out today, and I always wondered what it stood for, but it's Analytic Services, it's what it stood for. It's been a very active group working in areas of biological response mechanisms and the problems that we have with response and preparedness. And in fact, I think it goes back to 1997 when a number of us here were deeply concerned because there were real problems about biological weapons, which the Soviet Union had been very deeply involved with. And then we'd had the anthrax attack where material was distributed, and there were concerns. And at that time, there was an attitude, I'll tell you how bad it was, that in medicine and public health, nothing was taught about diseases such as anthrax or smallpox because people were morally opposed to biological weapons. Well, I was opposed to them too, but on the other hand, if we had an attack with biological weapons, somehow somebody's got to respond, and we got to know what we're doing. And so, indeed, beyond that, we're also concerned about a second issue, and that was emerging diseases, because AIDS had come along in 1984, and we suddenly woke up to the fact that this was a huge problem, and there are other diseases, emerging diseases, which not even thought of yet, and are we in a position to really investigate, deal with, cope with, and so forth. So Elin has been in that field, and very prominently, in addition to being an answer, she's been, she said, as noted here, that she led 3 NATO Science for Peace and Security Advanced Study Institutes, bringing together health leaders from many parts of Europe. And she's been doing a number of activities, as she tells me, both in Europe and with other countries in Asia as well. So with that, let me introduce Elin Gursky, who is in the field we've been working on and concerned about since really 1997, the field of biological organisms and how they might afflict us suddenly and without a preparation. Elin?
Thank you very much, DA, and my fellow alums. It is an honor to be here today and to share my thoughts about biosecurity and my aha moment, although they will be aha moments. I've had a very interesting journey in public health at a time where public health itself has had an interesting journey. So absent the benefit of PowerPoints, which is really difficult, I'm going to ask your indulgence to read from my script so I don't go over my allotted time. I had worked for several years prior to seeking a doctorate here, a stop on my way to medical school, I had thought. I had applied to only one university. It would be Johns Hopkins or the purchase of a horse. When accepted to what was then the School of Hygiene and Public Health, I remember saying, "But God, I really want a horse." The East Baltimore campus offered an insatiable intellectual smorgasbord. Upon degree completion, and having come from the clinical world, I was eager to return to practice and apply all I had learned. My first post-Hopkins position was at a local public health department running its communicable disease programs. The county in which I directed this department would nationally distinguish itself as having the second highest rate of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, thank you, George Comstock, the second highest rate of primary and secondary syphilis, and a year which saw us go from 3 to 56 infants born with congenital syphilis, a growing HIV/AIDS epidemic, major outbreaks from enteric pathogens, and a cyclical surge in animal rabies. My mission was clear: co-locate infant immunization and STD clinics, expand all clinical services, get pregnant women into obstetrical care at least before the 3rd trimester, find funding to add physician time, increase tuberculosis training to the medical community, initiate public health rounds to better integrate clinical and epidemiologic activities, and raise the bar of public health practice across a cohort of passionate but basically on-the-job trained staff, and change their perspective that public health was only open for business 9 to 5, Mondays through Fridays. And those were just my goals for the first 6 months. Over time, the quality and availability of our public health service delivery improved, our epidemiology improved, our collaboration with the medical community improved. and our recognition in and importance to the community improved. And then there was government. Budgets that were cut despite escalating infectious disease morbidity, requests that were made to align our reports with available funding, not disease rates, fewer restaurant inspections, reductions in the number of clinics that would remain open, do more with less, which led to my first aha moment. Practicing effective public health would entail a lot of political challenges. From there, I moved to practice public health at the state level, further from the community and closer to governmental decision-making, once again trying to advance the cause and importance of public health. After one administration, I was offered an opportunity outside of government, and I was ready. I became the Vice President for Public Health, a new position, for a 10 acute care hospital system. I was eager for the challenge of shaping the practice of population-based medicine in a system that served 1/5 of the state's citizenry, a state where less than 15% of people over 65 had had pneumococcal pneumonia vaccine, yet made frequent visits to emergency rooms. A system eager to bring women into preventive care and increase early detection for breast cancer. A system where any encounter with a medical care provider might reduce the frequency of missed opportunities to check immunization history, discuss tobacco use, and query exercise and diet behaviors. After these almost 5 years of swimming upstream, I came to my second aha moment. Practicing effective public health entails a lot of political challenges. I know, that's remarkably similar to the first aha moment. Next, I was invited to enter the environment of a think tank at what was then the Johns Hopkins University Center for Civilian Biodefense Strategies, truly an honor, created and led by none other than D.A. Henderson. This was a move, I was told by colleagues, that would ruin my public health career, which I had already put at risk by leaving a health department for a hospital system. I would never get to use public health. I was admonished. 2 weeks later, the world experienced 9/11. The memories of simpler days investigating nursing home outbreaks of Salmonella typhimurium, or college dormitories following a death from Neisseria meningitidis, were overtaken by helping craft strategies to protect a nation from Bacillus anthracis. I continued my focus on these issues after moving to Analytic Services, where I am now, a not-for-profit public research institute, and this also included a stint in federal government. I had a wide range of activities through which to serve this new and growing public health biosecurity enterprise. Indeed, disaster provided opportunity. Public health was in the news, and funding followed. There was pushback, of course, and you've heard DA talk about the moral opposition, concerns that the world of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, might not align with the public health mission. The money was persuasive. Work in a public health department and you will know how persuasive money can be. Unprecedented amounts of money. Even remote health departments got access to the internet. There was training in Category A agents, collaborations with safety, academia, intelligence, National Guard, and other sectors expanded the public health lens. There were tabletop exercises, unheard of in public health. The preparedness paradigm inspired great debate and incited quandary. Questions were raised regarding roles and responsibilities. Logistics, what's logistics to public health? Regulation, authority, ethics. Exactly who does the work of public health? How do we harness the capabilities and resources of the private sector and non-traditional providers who want to help, like Walmart, Target, local pharmacies? the pharmaceutical industry ramped up production of vaccines and medical countermeasures. But how would we administer these products to people swiftly before they got sick? How would we reach people living in rural areas, far distant from healthcare facilities, probably far distant from certain risks of exposure as well? Could we trust people to keep emergency antibiotics in their home? How do you ethically prioritize the administration of vaccines and medical countermeasures that are in short supply? What was the best strategy for alerting and risk messaging? Can you incentivize people to stock up on food and water and shelter in place until help arrives? Do the investments in costly early detection systems help leaders make timely decisions to protect public health? Towards the end of the first decade of the new century, the preparedness effort lost traction. Amerithrax, a distant memory, smallpox, rarely mentioned today in the lay press, economic crises and empty local and state coffers have successively eroded many of the public health capabilities in which we had invested. Many of my former colleagues in public health departments are retiring early or are being retired. So my third aha moment, practicing effective public health entails a lot of political challenges. For several years now, as DA stated, I've been working with international colleagues through the EU and NATO, and not only on WMD preparedness and response, but also pandemic influenza, natural disaster planning. And I need not articulate the political challenges associated with working within a multilateral context. But as always, the efforts and spirit of people dedicated to improving public health of their countries, some under very disheartening conditions, offers hope and fortifies our resolve. For me and many others, today's definition of biosecurity is far broader than anthrax and plague. Our biosecurity challenges are enormous and extend beyond Category A agents. There is a sufficiency of extremist interests that demand our continued vigilance and a prepared and practiced, and let me emphasize, funded public health workforce. Today's biosecurity challenges also include, and on a grand scale, access to potable water and food security. Typhoons and tornadoes, earthquakes and tsunamis kill and displace thousands of people annually. Conflict. Currently, global conflicts have resulted in over 33 million uprooted people, including refugees and IDPs, internally displaced people. There are millions of displaced people living in constrained and suboptimal settings like refugee camps, and many have lived there for years, if not generations. In Syria alone, according to a recent GRS report, an estimated 6.5 million people are IDPs and another 2.5 million are refugees. Over 175 emerging and re-emerging pathogens, many zoonotic, affect and are affected by the movement of people and habitat and climate change, further contributing to resource depletion and reducing agricultural yields. And then there is the other important issue affecting global biosecurity, maybe the most important: governance. Good governance, because practicing effective public health is a political challenge. The Bloomberg School knows this better than anyone, and happily I recognize I am preaching to the choir. Bloomberg's global reach, specifically to country leaders and key stakeholders, offers perhaps the most hopeful, sustainable promise to our biosecurity future. While I did not get a horse, there were many times in my career I have thought, surely there must be a pony in there. I am most grateful to the Bloomberg School for inculcating a moral imperative that has sustained me through past challenges and will for those yet to come. Thank you.
Ellen, I thank you very much. It's really, this is a field that she's been in and I've been working in, which has been very different from anything we ever envisaged before. And as we see the effect of some of our results very tangibly in the response in Boston and the bombing and the Hurricane Sandy bit, and each of these really is built on many of the resources and training that has been funded through efforts that we have made, and there's a lot to be done yet, but it's a very exciting field, and but one we wouldn't have dreamed of at the time we were here. Our last speaker is somebody who can say needs no introduction. Dan has been involved in some of the most exciting educational work that I think I am aware of, and has worked with as an advocate in the gun control area and making sense out of firearms and what have you, has been admired everywhere. And I think his credibility and his ability to be an advocate, but at the same time such a credible advocate, has made a very various subjects which are so fraught with emotion, return to earth and, let's say, look at the facts and tried to stabilize it. And he'd certainly done a whale of a job at that. And I admire your work enormously. At the present time, he's Professor of Public Health and Management and directs the PhD program in Health and Public Policy, and is Deputy Director for the Center of the Prevention of Youth Violence, and of course all here at Hopkins. Dan, great to have you with us.
Thank you, DA, for that really kind introduction. I'm gonna, of course, try to follow this theme with the aha moments and also sort of what has motivated me to tackle what is a very emotional issue and political issue. Of course, as I delved into public health, it became apparent to me there's nothing in public health that's not political. And so if you aren't comfortable with politics, then you probably ought to choose another field. I'm going to start just sort of like some of our other speakers, just how'd you land in public health? And so I landed in public health as a result of my poor judgment. I'll fill that in now. I thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. And in my senior year, I was cruising. I was doing really well in my classes, and I had my eyes set. I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And I scheduled my GRE exams right after finals. And I was just wasted. I was so tired. And I took my general GRE and my psych-specific one back to back. So by the time I took my psychology GRE, and I didn't do any prep, I did very poorly. I didn't get into any of the programs that I wanted to get into, so I had some time to kill and figure out, okay, maybe there's something else for me that I was really meant to do. And it actually was truly a blessing in disguise. I did need to step back. it was rather fortuitous that even though I'd started early on my path thinking I wanted to do clinical psychology, by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I was far more interested in all the political and social forces that affect our lives and well-being. So having no other credentials than a bachelor's in psychology, I was qualified to be in charge of a Department of Social Services in a very small rural county in Kentucky, where I did mostly child protective work and work on domestic violence. I believe I was 21 years of age, and I believe the first week on the job, I had a very unfortunate situation where I had to investigate a case of abuse and interview it was a grandmother in this case, and it was a bad case. And on the very first week of my job, she threatened me with a gun if I would take this child out of her home. So maybe that somewhere down the line was in the back of my mind as far as where I was heading. I knew doing that very difficult work, and my hat's off to anybody who can do that over a long period of time. I know many people have dedicated their careers and lives to that very important work. But I knew that I couldn't. I didn't think I could take the emotional toll or whatever connected to that work. And I found public health. It really lined up with a lot of my interest. I'm a son of a small town politician. My dad was mayor for 20 years. And sort of, understood and always thought about community level things. And so I got into public health, not knowing a whole lot about it, but just sort of the general idea kind of appealed to me. I did my master's at University of Michigan, and I took their very first course that they ever taught in that school on injury prevention. There were 2 students. And so that's how new it was to public health. And in that course, I probably at least 2/3 of our readings were written or were studies written by faculty members at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Many of them led by Professor Sue Baker, who basically everybody knows of her amazing work that she's done. And so that really made an impression on me, her work, and someone who came in to talk about his work, Alexander Wagonar, who worked in the area generally of traffic safety issues. So I got an internship with him. When I went to public health, I said, that's really interesting. Not so interested in research, though. That seems kind of boring. But, I'm sure I could do something good with it. But the only internship I could find was research. Okay, that's cool. So I was able to work with Alex, and Alex is just a tremendous researcher and continues to in some ways, be a guiding light to me on the research side. I was involved in a study that looked at the effects of child passenger protective laws that said you had to keep your kids buckled up safely in child restraint. And we found that it saved lives. And that just blew me away. That I could be part of some study that says a public policy went into place and fewer people died. Not only fewer people, but innocent children. And I was like, wow, that's cool. So I want to do some more of that. That sounds good. So the only place to do that, of course, Johns Hopkins. And that's how I landed here in the fall of '87 and started my doctoral program to study injury prevention. And literally, actually, I think before my first day of class, Sue Baker already put me in charge of a study. And that was just such a thrill to me to be able to collaborate with people like Sue Baker. But during the late 1980s and early 90s, when I was in my doctoral program, was a really bad period for Baltimore and many other cities. Homicide rates, very specifically gun homicide rates involving mostly, not entirely, but mostly young black males, were skyrocketing. We had never seen anything increase that rapidly. Over a matter of 5 years, we had a tripling and sometimes quadrupling of the rates. It was just mind-boggling. And though I did not come here to study about violence and violence prevention, I was so profoundly affected by being here at that time, and particularly in a campus in East Baltimore where it was so impacted by that problem. So my aha moment was, and actually it was facilitated by my advisor, Stephen Terrett, that I should focus on guns and the role of guns and what we can do about gun violence. At that time, public health was sort of kind of just discovering that maybe we had something to offer to this problem. And as I started to dig into this, my next aha moment was, we don't really know what we're doing, do we? We were making ourselves feel good that we could at least do better than law enforcement and criminal justice, because they were really screwing it up, which is true, frankly. I mean, many of the policies and approaches that they applied to this epidemic that I was referring to, the best research now suggests that that only made it worse. And it's probably continued to, these same sort of problems that stick with us today. So it was early, and I felt, well, at least, you know, I might be in a position to have a role as public health figures this problem out. And at the time I was getting my doctoral degree, the state was mobilizing. Vinnie DeMarco, who's still at it, working on this problem, mobilized people and worked with faculty members here, Steve Terrett, Sue Baker, and others. And they ended up passing a law to ban what then were referred to Saturday night specials, or junk guns. These are very small, highly concealable guns that are very overrepresented in crime. I not for my dissertation. I'm not going to tell you about my dissertation because, frankly, it bores the heck out of me. But I subsequently undertook a study to study the impact of that law that was passed while I was doing my doctoral training and concentrating on this problem. And what that research found was that that law did not, of course, eradicate this problem, but it had a very important impact. We estimated that it saved roughly 40 lives per year over the study period that we studied. Again, very reinforcing type of thing for me that while I'm studying something and it's saving, the thing I'm studying is saving lives. Let's do it some more of it. Around, you know, in the middle of my career, I should have said actually that my first job after getting my doctoral degree, I did a brief stint working as an epidemiologist at a trauma center in Washington, D.C., then known as the murder capital of the world. That's a little exaggeration, of course. But the problem was quite acute there. I not only had the opportunity to sort of study trends and patterns in gunshot wound epidemiology, but they also had a prevention program that they did, that they sponsored, went into some of the most challenging school environments with the prevention messages and sort of strategies. How can you avoid violence, particularly gun violence? And it was not particularly impressive, what we were trying to do. We were trying to convince young people growing up in environments that are really unconscionable environments. And guns were everywhere in their environments. And we thought we were going to solve this with a 10-session curriculum and warning them that they were at risk, so don't do risky things like get into fights and handle guns. It's a very simplistic kind of notion. And one of the first articles I wrote after Steve Terrett threw me a rescue line from my experience in the trauma center, I learned very quickly that a public health person in a trauma center is pretty low down the totem pole, and I wasn't going to necessarily be able to pursue what I wanted to pursue. So Steve Terrett had a position and offered me that to come onto the faculty here in 1992, and I came running, and have been very pleased that I made that choice. So I published a study saying that was entitled "The Unconvincing Case for." I may not get the title right exactly, but "An Unconvincing Case for Adolescent Conflict Resolution," because it was being pushed as the solution. Now, look, I have 2 adolescents. I know they need to figure out how to resolve their conflicts, and those social skills are important. But I also knew that that wasn't going to be the solution to kids getting killed on such a regular basis, the way we were going about it. And I ruffled some feathers in public health there, but that's all right. If you're going to do something and tackle a contentious area, you just gotta follow what the data say, and that's what I felt I was doing. So another revelation. Okay, so I'm working on this problem for a very long time, and we're not finding many things that are working. So that's hard, particularly on the behavioral side, at least on the most serious forms of violence. We finally got better at doing those school-based programs, I'm happy to say. But nothing convincing to say that that was going to lead to fewer people getting shot. And that's sort of what I was interested in. And then I learned about a program that was developed by a epidemiologist who had worked on infectious disease before he came to the problem of violence. And his name is Gary Slutkin. He developed a program then called Ceasefire in the city of Chicago. Now it's called Cure Violence. It's a worldwide program. And he was using former gang members to go in and connect with the highest risk individuals, develop relationships, and then teaching them and helping them resolve their disputes without shooting each other. And I have to say, when it was just explained to me in the way that I just explained it to you, I said, you gotta be kidding. You mean somebody's gonna go into these people and just say, you know, it's really not a good idea for you to shoot each other, you know? I mean, it just seemed very, you know, like I'd say, you got to deal with all these root causes, you got all these guns around, and I'd already written this thing that, look, conflict resolution isn't such an effective way to go about it. But I went to Chicago, and I started to think, well, maybe it will, actually. I was very impressed, and the way it was delivered was very important, the credible messengers, these former gang members. And it was such a learning experience. I was asked by the health commissioner at that time to go with some people from the health department and the police department to go observe this program in Chicago, which I did. And I was just so thoroughly impressed and thought, maybe it will, worth a try. So Baltimore decided to implement and replicate that program in some of our most challenging neighborhoods, and we call the program Safe Streets. And I learned probably more through that study than any study I've done, because it connected me most closely to the people involved in the problem. And I've developed some very close friendships with the outreach staff and interrupters, and helped me again connect to places that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. Very briefly, first place that they implemented this program is roughly a quarter mile from where we are right now, in the neighborhood of McElderry Park. And within the first 2 years the program was in place, they basically didn't have they didn't have a single homicide. And that had never occurred in living memory in that neighborhood after they did that. So an aha moment for me was, well, this can work if done correctly. I want to flash forward now back to the gun policy thing to sort of wrap up the final things here. And as many of you know, a month after Newtown, we held a big summit here at Hopkins, and I was very honored to help lead that and get the support from the school and university to do that. We put forward the best evidence we thought to help policymakers make wise decisions that will lead to less gun violence in the United States. I had the opportunity to testify in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House following that, and really had some great opportunities to do what we should be doing, which is bringing our research to policymakers to make a difference. But we all know nothing ever happened in Congress, right? The day, this is my last aha moment, the day that vote went down in the Senate, it cemented in my mind that the only way forward for any kind of rational gun policy at the federal level anyway is only going to come about if we start addressing this very differently than before and reach out to gun owners. All of our survey data has showed us that we can find a lot of things that we disagree with, okay? It's people who want stronger gun laws and gun owners, but we found that there was actually no statistical difference between gun owners and non-gun owners, Democrats or Republicans, on core, very specific idea, which is simple. We favor policies that keep guns out of the wrong hands. And literally the next day, our foundation reached out to us in Dallas and said, we're interested in what gun owners can do on this problem. And I said, this is perfect timing. So long story short, we were funded by that foundation, and one of the things that we're examining now is gun owners' attitudes and what are going to be the kind of messages and messengers to move us forward so that the more than 80% of gun owners who support things like universal background checks have their voices heard rather than the radical extreme voice by Wayne LaPierre and the NRA. So that's my final aha moment, that we're going to get from here to there by building bridges to gun owners who will then demand that they listen to the gun owners as opposed to Wayne LaPierre.
Well, many thanks to the three of you. I think this has been a very stimulating session we've had. And we're now open for questions. We will go on, I guess, for another 15, 20 minutes, and then... 10 minutes. Excuse me? 10 minutes, I'm told. And don't run over. But then there'll be a break, and Dr. Sharfstein will be here at 4 o'clock when he will be speaking. So at this point, let us raise your hands, and let's start the question and answer session of this. I'm sure you have a few questions. If you don't, I suggest you're sleeping here. Questions?
We could be still
right here.
Sleeping, but so I just had a question just directed towards like early in your career. How did you make the decisions as you were going on in your career to that next step? Like what were the things that you considered as you moved to each new position?
Are you hearing this? Are we getting enough volume? Yeah. Okay. And you're asking all three, or?
Yes.
Is this on? So I'm still early in my career, but I've had a lot of changes along the way, and when I have to make a decision, when I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and this is the yoga teacher in me, I imagine being in that place, and I think about how does that feel. So if it's like the position at NYH, I imagine myself there going, sitting in an office, sitting in front of a classroom. How do I feel? And it's really worked for me. I feel like I am lucky to get up and do whatever I'm doing that day. At every point when I've kind of followed that voice, it's been the right decision.
No?
Come on. I think you have to be open to opportunity. You have to try things that you might not ordinarily think of. I have seen such remarkable changes in public health that I think the opportunities are enormous, and they're very, very different. When I was a student here, I think public health is now recognized as an important career that can and should be applied to just about every sector, every profession you can think of. So get smart, learn everything that you can, and then try new opportunities.
Dan?
I think I would just say that you shouldn't be, too confined in what you will consider. Think about any potential opportunity as a potential building block, a stepping stone. And maybe what's before you isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all, but then you figure out, what do I get from that, from that experience, and then build upon it. Some people are very motivated to address a very specific health problem, and that's fine. Even though I get some students who come to me, and the reason they're here is because they want to study violence and how to prevent it, period. I usually actually try to advise them to think more broadly, because public health is going to continue to evolve. And what you should be thinking of as public health professionals is, what kind of tools do you bring to that? Whether it's research skills, management skills, how to change behavior effectively, whatever it is, it can probably be applied to a range of public health problems, just like Dr. Henderson, after he found himself in the position of there's no more smallpox to eradicate, he found something else to do. So, so we can all do that, right?
I would like to just amplify this by saying in my career that I've been just amazed at how much more broadly, the field of public health has been interpreted to be. And now that we're seeing more and more of medicine and public health coming together, and we're looking at all sorts of issues in a different way than we have before, with the larger scale health programs with costs and looking at more in the way of prevention and all different ways of doing this. It's just amazing how many of the skills we pick up from epidemiology and biostatistics in the health education side and motivation, my goodness, that have a tremendous application as we begin to move ahead in broader fields, so that the field now looks so different to me from what it did when I entered the field. And even when I left the deanship, it has gone now to a much broader area. I never would have thought that at Johns Hopkins University we would have an undergraduate major in public health. Not only do we have an undergraduate major, it is the largest major in the undergraduate curriculum. This is at Johns Hopkins. This would never have been predicted before. Question?
Yes, I'll put this question out to the whole panel. I'm a current student, and I think a lot of us current students are at a point where we're making decisions about how to go forward in our career. And many of us had careers before this, and in talking with a lot of my colleagues, there's that tension between choosing the sort of safe path, maybe building on what you've done previously, and going off sort of in a new direction. And it sounds like you guys have, each of you in your own ways, made those decisions yourselves. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on those sort of decision points, taking the safe path versus taking a risk, and what you decided at each point in your career.
All right, maybe you
Why do I keep getting put first? Well, my first thought is to respond that it's not necessarily one or the other, that it's not a safe path or a risky path, that doing the safe thing has risks, doing the risky thing, has some certainties. And what has worked best for me is being able to take the old skills that I have and bridge them with the new skills I have. I am not going to be a famous choreographer. I'm not going to be a yoga guru. I'm not going to be an epidemiologist. I'm not going to be, a famous rheumatologist. But I have skills in all of those areas that very few people have that overlap. So what could I do with my understanding of how moving bodies feel and blend that with what I know about what it's like to live with arthritis? And there I have something new that not many people are doing. So think about creative ways to have your cake and eat it too.
Well, I would say figure out what you like, figure out what you're good at, and take some risks. You'll have a good time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to add to that, but I think some people come here kind of underestimating what they can do, what their potential is in terms of making an impact in public health. And I suspect most of you here can have very important and meaningful impacts on public health. And that's what you came here to do, and I hope that you follow that instinct rather than not just fall back on the safety.
Let me add a thought about this. I think the problem is of being trapped. I think many students feel like I really have to make a decision. It's going to go this way or this way. To temporize by taking a position and think of this as, well, look, I'll try this for a year or two or three, right, but not to feel that I have to go in this path. I think it's a bit emancipating to say there are other opportunities. And I think with the field of public health, as broad as it is very different than if you're trained in ophthalmology and try to move on to another field. You're a highly skilled technician at that point. You really can't move very easily, whereas with public health, there's a lot of flexibility here. In general, I've advised the thought, if you can find a job, let us say you've got a choice between working in a small clinic down in Liberia or working with a government office in Sierra Leone, one where you're going to be alone, the other where you're going to be meeting and seeing a number of other people and what a number of other people are doing and what the jobs are. And I would take it in a broader sense to say that if you are somewhere at least on a ladder where you're meeting people either through meetings or through interchange with their activities, you get an opportunity to learn about the bigger world out there, which you really can't learn by reading. It's the contact with people and sort of an opportunity to ask the question of many of them, well, what do you think? What do you think is a good way? And this idea of asking, getting other people to respond, is a very important one. We learned it back in medical school when we were interviewing a patient. Keep the patient talking and ask them questions, and they'll eventually tell you the diagnosis, and they'll tell you how it should really be controlled or motivated. I've used this in epidemics where I'm going into an epidemic and I don't know anything about this damn disease. And you go in and there's a press is there, and we wait a moment, you bring all the people together and say, what do you think? And again, you find very bright people with very bright ideas who are afraid to express it voluntarily. But if you're there and you're talking, they'll be happy to talk with you about it. And so coming as dean, you can imagine, I was appointed as dean and I'd never been on a faculty before. And you can't imagine how many people I ask, what do you do? What do you think we ought to do? What do you expect the dean to do? And it was surprising how many people had really very creative ideas, but they'd never been in a position where they could express them and expect to get any response. So I think this question of asking the question and really realizing there are a lot of smart people around who've given a lot of thought to a lot of these things, and if you can tap into that, you're going to be very well served. Another question.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And my question is pretty much related to the point that Dr. Henderson has raised, and it's more about, I would love to hear your reflections in the career path of a junior researcher, of a junior public officer. You always encounter with senior people and try to engage them. It's some challenges sometimes, pretty much about the status quo or some stuff that are really staying, and you want to come out with an idea and try to engage them in that ideas, as you've been successful doing that. So what will be your advice to share with other junior researchers like myself to achieve that goal in the most efficient way every time you get a chance to engage a senior in your thoughts or in your line of research?
Do you want to elaborate at all, or?
Yeah.
Do you want
It's a very good comment, Al. Let's go. Standing.
I have to confess that I've frankly been lucky. I've been lucky that when I've worked with senior people, they've made it very easy for me to be a collaborator or an equal and feel that I have something to contribute to that. So I don't know if it's very useful to say choose the senior people you work with, but I think that you have to be confident. You know, I feel I've mentored a lot of students over the time that I've been here since 1992, and we get some of the most brilliant students in the world, and that's one of the reasons why I put up with this stuff at Hopkins. No, truly. I mean, it is an honor and a treat to be able to teach and mentor such talented, motivated people. And I feel like most of the time, my job is to make them better understand just how smart and capable they are, and to act with confidence and approach whether you're someone senior or not. You have something important to contribute. So I don't know if I have more than that to offer.
So I'm often in a boardroom, the only female sometimes, and certainly the youngest person in the room. So I've been at a few tables with a lot of old men. No offense to old men. But it can be intimidating, and not only a fear that, you know, will my ideas be respected, but how should I be so that I'm appropriate and so that I am respectful of their seniority and I don't speak out too much, but I speak out enough, and I'm still figuring that out. But I have to say, Johns Hopkins is really helpful. So when people know that I have a Doctor of Public Health from Johns Hopkins, I come in the door with a little cred. And then I'm a pretty outspoken person, and I can talk a lot. And so I'm learning to be really careful about when I speak up and to save my words for when I think it's important, so that when I do speak up, it's a good idea and it makes sense to the people at the table, and that gives kind of another check in my she has credibility, she has good things to say. Hey, that young kid knows something. But I think that it's something that I'm still trying to figure out. Those are just some initial ideas.
I think you should feel comfortable reaching out to people you would like to mentor you, to ask for assistance. I do a tremendous amount of mentoring. We have summer programs, internships, postdoc types of programs, and certainly if you're in the Hopkins community, there is an ethos of mentoring and teaching, and take advantage of it, ask for it.
I think we're going to have to end the session, but I'd like to add something on behalf of those who are somewhat beyond the graduation level, and to my colleagues who are been around a long time. Don't be afraid to speak up. These people are young people sitting around the table. They're all very bright, and they'll give you more the benefit of the doubt than you probably deserve. But don't be afraid of them just because they are that smart, and they are that smart, but draw on them. And I must say, the Hopkins experience, and I've been to many schools, and I've dealt with many situations, but this is a different atmosphere, and it's a wonderful atmosphere of collegiality, and I think it gets good students, excellent students, and you put in with the extraordinary faculty. And then you keep the dean moving around enough so that he doesn't get into trouble and impose himself too much. And you come up with a very rich mixture. So thank you all for being here, and good luck in your future aspirations here. Thank you.
We invite you to enjoy a short coffee break in the gallery, so just make a left out of this room. And we'll meet right back in here for Dr. Sharfstein's talk at 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Very good.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for, for everything you've done so far. And for those who are just joining, thanks for being here for this lecture. We're really excited. As I'll just mention for those of you who weren't here earlier, that this we had an alumni day and alumni week some years ago, and we stopped doing it. And it's one of the things that since I've been dean, we've wanted to start up, and we've been fortunate to be able to recruit a number of people to help us reach out to alumni. So Ricky Fine for many years was the person who was liaison with alumni. She was also head of government affairs. She was also a fundraiser. So she had multiple jobs. And then, but we're fortunate that both, three, Jimmy Lou DeBakey and Morgan Martin and Allison Hardy, who, could you raise your hands there? Okay. And it was hard to find three women over 6'3", but we did it, and we got them here. So I want to thank you for making all the arrangements today and for making this happen. We're really pleased to have Dr. Josh Sharfstein here, and he is, as you know, the Secretary of Health for the state of Maryland. And Josh is just an incredible hero of public health. He's done innovative things in every position he's been in. Was on the Hill working for Henry Waxman for a number of years. Before he was in this current job as Secretary of Health for Maryland, he was the Deputy Commissioner of the FDA, and before that he was our Health Commissioner here in Baltimore. So he's somebody who we know well and who has been just an incredible resource for our school, for our students, and for our faculty. And I think we've always been blessed here to have good relations with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and also with the city, but they've probably never been as good as they are now. I want to thank you for that, for being such a good partner. So he also serves, I'll just say a few things about it. He also serves on the Health Information Technology Policy Committee for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is really an incredible amount of work. I know because I served on it before him, and I couldn't take it. It was just so much work, and that's the committee that really was charged with operationalizing the HITECH Act, to increase the use of electronic medical records in the U.S. and then define meaningful use and all the things that have happened since then. He also sits on the board on population health and public health practice of the Institute of Medicine and the editorial board of the Journal of the American Medical Association. So so he's originally from Baltimore, but he got none of his education in Baltimore after high school. So he went to Harvard College, then Harvard Medical School, and then did a combined residency program in pediatrics at Boston Medical Center and Boston Children's, and did the fellowship in general peds at the Boston University School of Medicine. And but he has a long, and he doesn't have a degree in public health, which I always hold up as an example that, you know, we try to train leaders, and we know we can train people to be leaders, but the most important thing is the person, and he exemplifies that. And when I asked him, when I first met him, how he got interested in public health, he told me he worked with Bernie Geyer when he was in medical school. And Josh is married to a wonderful woman who was a fellow in our general internal medicine program when I was there, Yingvild Olson. And he told me, because she went to Guatemala, you went to Guatemala, right? Is that right? And so that was his first international experience in public health as a medical student, and taught him about the importance of the social determinants of health. So we're really pleased, Josh, that you took time out from your I know, incredibly hectic schedule to be here with us and talk to our alumni. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dean Clagg. Thanks for having me, everybody. I appreciate that very kind introduction. I'm actually not from Baltimore, but my grandparents are from Baltimore. My grandfather's brother was the tuberculosis czar of Baltimore in the 1940s. He's a pulmonologist at Sinai Hospital, and there are pictures of him in the public health newsletter around that time. But my mom grew up in Baltimore, and it's been great for me to live here. I used to visit my grandparents here all the time. And I particularly want to thank Dean Clagg for the tremendous attention that he has paid to the city and the state. I think it's been terrific. It was terrific when I was the city health commissioner and also at the state, really to feel like we can draw upon the incredible resources here. Just recently we had a terrific meeting about the new hospital payment system in Maryland with some of the faculty here at the school that was just really stimulating and potentially will lead to a lot of collaboration. So what I'm going to talk about, and feel free if there are questions along the way. This is a little bit of an audience participation presentation. And if nobody raises their hand, I'm going to call on Dean Clagg, so just so everybody knows. And I'm going to talk about public health leadership. I'm going to talk generally for about 2 seconds, then I'm going to go right into several cases. I'm going to turn this off first. Excellent. So the first point I just want to make is that every type of crisis is different, and you don't want to, deal with the last crisis. You have to take each one on its own terms. So there are some basic principles. I think it's important to be thoughtful, to use the tools that you have available, and to communicate clearly and transparently as you're dealing with the crisis. And then probably, I think Dean Clagg may be tweeting in front of us, my very eyes here, to look for opportunities within the crisis to make additional progress after the crisis hits. And I'm going to go through a few examples here, but I'm happy to talk about other things as well. Drawing from my experience as a city health commissioner working at FDA and now at the state. So this is Swan Park in Baltimore, and I'm sitting at my desk minding my business as the city health commissioner. In general, what would happen when you're a city health commissioner is someone comes running into your office and they tell you, because of A, B, because of B, C, because of C, D, because of D, E, and by the time they get to J, there's a news camera outside and the mayor wants you to be the spokesperson, and you're sitting there going, A? So like someone came to me once and it was like, there's this stable in the middle of downtown Baltimore, and it turns out that we have to inspect the horses, so our horse inspector was out there, and the horses were actually doing surprisingly well for a stable in the middle of downtown Baltimore, but turned out it looked like it was a total fire trap, and this was 3 months ago, but then finally the fire department came out, and they've condemned the building, and now all these horses have no place to go, and Fox News is outside, and the mayor wants you to be the spokesperson. And I was like, there's a stable in the middle of downtown Baltimore? And it's a true story. So this was a call that I got. It was different. It was that there is a park in downtown Baltimore where, right next to where there used to be a chemical factory, and the chemical factory had made arsenicals, and there were some documents that surfaced in some litigation that suggested that there might be high levels of arsenic in the soil at the park where Al Kaline had played baseball and all these kids still played. And I said, well, why do you think there might be, well, actually, and they said, we're doing the testing and we're going to find out tomorrow whether there are high levels of arsenic. So that was the phone call. The testing will come back tomorrow. I called, I think, someone I knew at CDC who said, well, you know that it's going to be high levels of arsenic. The normal level was like up to 20, and it had previously tested in the thousands, like 3,000 or 4,000. And I said, well, how do you know it's going to, I mean, that was 40 years ago. It looks like the historical testing was 30 or 40 years ago, and they said arsenic doesn't go anywhere in the soil, Josh. So I learned that. So the testing is going to come back tomorrow. You look up, arsenic. It's in the soil. It's underneath there. It's not airborne at this point. The good news is you've gotten a head start on something that may capture people's attention. Do you prepare to close the park if the level comes back in the thousands like you expect it will come back? Some of you may know the answer what we did, but you can relive history a different way. How many people say, that's just a scary enough number, we're going to close the park, take some time, figure out what's going on? And that's how many people say, it's buried in the ground, it's probably fine, for people to be running around. It's very unlikely to cause a problem, and we shouldn't overreact. So how many people are closing the park? Yeah, how many people are saying, let's keep it open and we can talk to people about how it's going? Okay, yeah, about 50-50. So we had the sign printed up to close the park. The numbers came back in the thousands, and there was a whole big issue. I felt at the time that it was better for us to be upfront about it, that while we were somewhat reassured, we couldn't be completely reassured. We were able to get CDC and ATSDR to commit to sending a team into Baltimore to do an analysis of the situation, meet with the community, which we did. I'll tell you, I really learned at this how hard it is to communicate about very small risks. Just incredibly hard, because people are sure there's something wrong, and that to communicate that there really isn't a good screening test, because if you do a urine sample, you're really only getting the last few days. If you weren't rolling around in the park, it's not going to help determine the exposure. So we wound up being the voice of how we're going to deal with this, being on the side of wanting to get to the bottom of it. Having moved quickly and closed the park, we were able to really, I think, be able to manage this rather than be in a position of what's going on and can we get there. I think it was the right decision. We wound up with some help from Lynn Goldman at the school here and some others. We put together a task force. At the same time that we closed the park, we said we were going to figure out how this could possibly have happened. And we wound up going through all the old documents. We understood quite a lot about what had happened. There was actually a task force in 1976 about the safety of the park, and they thought that this product called Keynote would be a risk, and the actual secret minutes of this said actually it's the arsenic that's a risk, but there were no public statements that were made around that time. We had a public health consultation from ATSDR, and eventually we wrote a paper about what lessons there were from this. So I think that interestingly, around this time, we found that there was some research that was done on the park that people really, that might have been helpful if it had been more widely publicized around the same time. So now you get to a question, which is, you have done all this, you have some credibility, and it turns out because the company that was next door in some iteration is still there, they actually, we got through the old documents, a map of the old chemical plant, and one of the buildings was called the arsenic shed. Which at the time I think I said, like, other than arsenic shack, there's pretty much nothing worse than the arsenic shed. So the question, they were willing to, had the legal obligation to fix. And they said, we're willing to pay, or we have to, under the law, technically, remove the entire hazard, dig up all the dirt. And I'll tell you, the health consultation came back saying very minimal risk. There was a chance that if you really rolled around in the dirt a lot and you were really, that there might be a potential increase in risk, but it was really very small without any remediation. They said that they could take it all off, or they would take off just the first couple feet, and they'd be able to put in bleachers and lights and all these things that the community wanted. So, city decision, would you do nothing? Because it's, it's generally safe, and just say save your money to the company. Would you say take away all the dirt? Would you say let's just take away the top 2 feet, or would you let the community decide? So let's do those first. Any votes for nothing? Any votes for got to get rid of the whole hazard? Any votes? 1? Okay, yeah. Any votes for top 2 feet? And any votes for let the community decide? Yeah, so we let the community decide, and they picked, whoops. They picked the bleachers. I thought I had pictures of the bleachers, but I don't have. They absolutely picked the bleachers. And if you go there today, I think you see bleachers and lights and scoreboards, and the kids are playing. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next example. And so before I go on, let me just pause for a second and say, I think that Swan Park was one of my first experiences at the health department in trying to deal with the crisis. But I think that the fact that we closed it at the beginning and we gained people's trust right from the beginning was absolutely critical to our ability to be successful. And one of the things that I have learned, and it's a lesson that can be extremely difficult, is that in this kind of crisis situation, and as we go through these other things, the only thing that really matters is your credibility. If you don't have credibility, you're in big trouble. You can be delivering bad news, but if people don't believe the bad news or the good news, then it's very difficult for the health department. So now, fast forward, I'm at FDA, and there's this vaccine called Rotarix. And we find out, we get a call that there's a graduate student somewhere who has figured out this new way of doing a reverse PCR from a primer. And he's been taking little viral sequences and dunking it into vaccines to see what he can grow out. And so he's doing this, and he gets a hit in this vaccine for rotavirus called Rotarix. And the hit is for porcine circovirus. Okay, and it was found in quantities that were comparable to the vaccine virus. So it wasn't like a couple little pieces. It was a fair amount of porcine circovirus. No known human effects. We quickly figured out that the virus was present all the way to the cells that made the vaccine. So it was everywhere, okay, in the supply chain. The vaccine had a strong safety record. So all the studies around safety were done in this. There was like one paper on porcine circovirus in renal transplant patients. That was it for the human population. There are 2 licensed rotavirus vaccines in the United States. The other one was in adequate supply. It was in space adequate supply in the United States. But Rotarix is the one that has been used around the world. And there was some concern expressed that if you took action against Rotarix, that the other countries would pull it. And rotavirus is a major cause of child injury and death around the world. So I would tell you that the lawyers said at the time that if the agency wanted to pull the vaccine off the market, we had ample legal basis for doing that, because the vaccine cannot contain contaminants, and this could easily be classified as a contaminant. So do you take the vaccine off the market, or do you keep it on the market while you analyze it? Do you disclose it, what you know right away or not? So let's do that one first. You've just been told this. Do you, how many people think there's an urgency to disclose what you know, even if you don't know all the details of the porcine circovirus and all that? How many people would say, let's research it first? May take a little while. All right, so let's go with the people who said, just for now, say the people who say you're going to disclose it. If you're going to disclose it, do you take it off the market at the same time? Or do you leave it on the market and say, we know of no known human problems, we're leaving it on the market for now, and we'll keep everybody posted, but we want you to know there's several million copies of porcine circovirus in there. There's the, I'll throw out a third option, which is to say you leave it on the market, but tell people to hold off on using it in the United States while we understand more, okay? For which there's no regulatory classification for that at all. So how many people and you can pretend you were one of the people, for the purpose of answering this, everyone's on the hook here. Someone else has made the decision, you're announcing it. Are you taking it off the market now? About maybe a third. How many people say, leave it on the market, this is a life-saving vaccine, we're gonna leave it on the market, and we're gonna look into it now? Maybe about a third. How many people say, hold on to it for a couple months, but use the alternative until we understand more? Maybe a third, a third, a third. So here is the FDA website. FDA is updating clinicians on information that has been made available about Rotarix. We've learned that components of an extraneous virus are present. There is no evidence at this time this finding poses a safety risk. While the agency is learning more, we are recommending that clinicians and public health professionals temporarily suspend the use of Rotarix. So we went with option 3. We felt like we had to disclose right away. We thought that is particularly around vaccines, we should be as transparent as possible. We were very worried that if we pulled it off the market completely, it would come off the market, and for all this, we would have thousands or tens of thousands of kids dying of diarrheal diseases in other parts of the world. So we communicated very aggressively that the only reason we're telling people to temporarily hold is that there's an alternative vaccine in the US, which, by the way, turned out to have porcine circovirus in it also, in a slightly less amount, though. And what we did is we held a quick advisory committee meeting. We pulled in the world's expert in porcine circovirus from the United Kingdom. And then I'll tell you what happened in a second. But I will tell you that when we made this announcement, we were able to get the message out. It did not cause a panic. We said, we just found this out. This is what we did. And there were some people on the extreme. Some people said, how dare you not take it off the market? And some people said, now FDA will never let it back on the market. Once you've done this, you've sort of threatened this vaccine, and you might as well have taken it off the market. But what wound up happening is we got a thorough advisory committee meeting. The advisory committee voted to keep it on the market, and we said, we've looked into it. We don't think it poses a human risk, and it remained in use and they gradually reformulated it so that the porcine circovirus, I guess, is not there. That's what happened. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears to, and again, let's just pause for a second. I think that there's some themes between the first two experiences, even though one is product safety and one is environmental health. I think trying to be upfront in communications is really important. The credibility, like, look, we found this is what we know, this is what we're doing. It's a nuanced message. It's very hard sometimes when people are expecting black and white to get a gray message, but that is often the most credible way to approach something, even if the one side or the other actually seems like it's going to be, a bold stroke or something like that. If something changes, you don't know. So my experience is you lead by getting out there, but your message can be candid and nuanced. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to switch gears a fair amount to a crisis in a broader sense, which is the crisis facing the healthcare system. which is a crisis, a different kind of crisis. It's maybe a slower burning crisis. It's not the you get a call crisis. But if you got a call, the call would say that there are many more deaths in the United States than in other countries, that there's enormous variation in life expectancy across different communities. In Baltimore, we did this study that was more than 20 years of life expectancy across the city. That Maryland, despite being one of the richest states in the country, is ranked in the middle when it comes to health. So, you know, it's the big crisis. At the same time, we're spending an enormous amount of money. So this is, you know, a little bit like the food is so terrible in such small portions. We're spending all this money, you know, and we have not great outcomes. And just briefly, if this is, you know, there are 3 graphs in public health that get darker each year. You know, maybe not. Well, one of them got a little bit lighter this year, right? So what are they? Obesity. What else? Nah, you don't get credit for diabetes once you've said it. Once you've said obesity. No, smoking's going down. Prescription drug abuse, that's the big one. You know, that gets darker every year. And this is healthcare costs. So this is healthcare costs as a percentage of median household income. And this is the experience of families and businesses. This is the experience of the federal government over time. This is healthcare spending. The big point to make, it's the only line in the long-term budget plans that's going up. It is the cause of all the federal budget issues. And this is the state budget and the percentage of the state budget that's gone to different things. And you can see how healthcare is outpacing everything. So it is an enormous fiscal drain on the country and the economy, and we get bad outcomes. Generally, in Maryland, we were number 1 or number 2 for readmissions for hospitals. So what tools do you have at hand? Well, when we were dealing with environmental health, we had ATSDR that could come in. When we were dealing with product safety, we had all the scientists that could come in the advisory committee. What do we have in Maryland to deal with those things? Well, we have some organization. We have a great public health system. We have a very cool and functional health information exchange, and we have the all-payer hospital system. One example of the public health system is we've created, and we actually just launched a whole new website. We had a soft launch for state health improvement. We have 18 local health coalitions. If you go on dhmh.maryland.gov/SHIP, SHIP, you can pull up our 39 core metrics by county, by race, ethnicity. Each county has its own page. Each county participates in one of the 18 local health public-private coalitions, and those websites are now used by those coalitions for meetings and all sorts of things. And it's a lot of interest. I like to say, like, photos like this only begin to capture the excitement of a local public health improvement meeting. But really, there are a lot of interesting collaborations happening around the state, and you've got the hospitals, doctors, public health, business, education, often in the same room, working on different projects. The information exchange connects all of the hospitals, emergency rooms, many of the doctors' practices in Maryland, labs, radiologists. As one example of what it does, Maryland is, as far as I know, the only state, or one of the very few states, that you can, if you're a primary care doctor, you can upload your patient list to the Health Information Exchange and get a secure email the moment your patient hits the ER. And so very helpful for managing patients to better health. Doesn't require anyone to write anything and fax it, just automatically. We use CRISP, which is the name for the nonprofit that operates the Health Information Exchange, as a common platform for different things. So we put our prescription drug monitoring program inside CRISP, so clinicians can get that. CRISP is, for people who aren't familiar with it, a verb now in Maryland. Like, have you crisped this patient yet? Seriously, that's when you know you're getting some traction. It's not just the numbers showing a lot of utilization. It's that. And Dean Clegg mentioned that my wife is a physician. Most of the time, when my wife is, getting into bed talking about her day, she's complaining about something that I have some direct or indirect responsibility for. That's one of the downsides. Yeah, exactly. But sometimes she gets it. She goes, "CRISP is so awesome." She said, I just figured out where my patient was. And it allows for rapid readmission measurement. We're actually running a provider database for the Maryland Health Connection out of CRISP, so you can look and see which plans your doctor participates in. And then we have the all-payer system, which is Maryland's the only state which has an independent commission that sets the rates for hospitals. Now, I'll tell you, historically, this has been totally in the world of the healthcare system and not so much in the world of public health. But gradually, especially now when you have this crisis in healthcare that's really draining the economy, you have to look for all the tools you have. And we have had a system that sets the rates. Each hospital gets its own rate structure. It includes extra to pay for the uncompensated care and for medical education and other things. And it also allows the use of creative incentives to improve quality and outcomes. Now I'm going to have to remember why I put this picture up here. Okay. So how do you think about the healthcare system? What's the way to communicate about it? How do you do that? How do you say, this is a crisis, what is going on? And I think that the pivotal moment for me came relatively early in this job when I was called to meet with the Baltimore Ecumenical Alliance, and I was late for the meeting, and I went running in there, and there were about 15 clergy looking very, very stern, all of them dressed, very formally, and I was immediately nervous and apologizing, and they were asking, I was there to talk to them about the Affordable Care Act, and I was talking about this or that, and finally at one point, one of them looked at me and said, Dr. Sharfstein, why is healthcare so expensive? And I started in a little bit on smoking and obesity, and I said, but smoking rates are going down, and cardiovascular risk factors in some respects are going down, but healthcare costs keep going up, and it has a lot to do with the way we pay. We pay for more interventions, more hospitalizations, so we get more interventions and more hospitalizations. We don't pay for health. We pay for care, and so you get a lot more care. It's very expensive, and everybody's looking at me, no facial expression, no give or take, nothing, and I'm getting more and more nervous. And finally, I said, it'd be like if each of you were paid by the prayer. So then there's like this gaping silence, my career is flashing before my eyes, And this one guy who was sitting across the table from me who, in my recollection, was wearing a cape. He may not have actually been wearing a cape. He leaned across the table, put his hand on my hand, bowed his head slightly, and said, "Let us pray." So that is the basic concept, that we have to explain that we are paying for healthcare wrong, and that we can actually, the purpose of the healthcare system is health. How do we align it? That is the principal message that I think is important for this particular crisis. Very briefly, I'll go through some of the things we're doing in Maryland. One of them is health enterprise zones. I'm joined by a student, a recent graduate of Stanford who's been with us for the year working on health enterprise zones, Ezekiel Richardson, has been helping us on this. This is an initiative of the Lieutenant Governor, Anthony Brown, that I've been very involved in, and we got some state funding. Basically, the insight is we've got these pockets of very poor health that are incredibly expensive, and we need to invest in community health and figure out a way to reinvest the savings within that area. And we have 5 zones in Maryland, and we have tremendous collaboration in each of them. They're all doing a number of different things, from loan banks, transportation routes, to really try to address some of the underlying causes of poor health. But at the same time, they have different types of sustainability mechanisms built in by different financial structures that are emerging in healthcare. The St. Mary's County Zone is one of them. This is a picture here. They are setting up, they have a transportation route, I think, now going, and they have been expanding their primary care. The second type of initiative, and I'll circle back on health enterprise zones in a minute, is through reforming hospital payment. And here the concept is, if we actually are setting rates, we can pay in other ways besides fee-for-service. And the Rate Setting Commission had started down this path. They had done some pilots where instead of paying per admission, they decided that they would pay a global budget to a hospital. So the CEO would know at the beginning of the year the total amount of money that they would get. And this is how I understand it. How can that be done through rate setting? basically the commission says to the CEO, your budget's going to be $100. If you have 20 admissions, I'll let you charge $5 for them. If you have 10 admissions, you can charge $10 for each. And if it's 5 admissions, you get to charge 20. So they know it's going to be $100. More volume doesn't equal more money. More volume just stresses them out. So it totally changes their orientation towards the purpose of hospitals and how the hospital needs to fit into the community. And that experience, which I'll talk about a little more, has been very, very interesting and very successful in certain parts of the state. And as it turns out, as fate would have it, the current system for cost control, for rate setting in Maryland, was under a lot of stress. It was premised on our keeping the price of each admission down. And keeping the price of each admission, the rate of growth in that price, lower than the national rate of growth. And that's a condition that had been met for several decades and was about to run out. So the whole premise of a rate setting system with Medicare participating was shaky at that point. So we sat down with CMS, we negotiated with them for about 18 months, and we worked out that Medicare would continue to participate, we could continue to set rates, but instead of focusing on the price per admission, we'd focus on the price per person or the cost per person. That, and we would basically shift to the idea to a global budget for all Maryland hospital revenue, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, private, anything. All revenue, because we set rates for private payers, Medicare, Medicaid, everybody. So that's what we worked out. This is where these global budget hospitals are located around the state. And we've noticed very interesting things. Meritus, right here, is a hospital that decided to take over the school health program. And I said, why are you taking over the school health program? And they said, well, we figured we can run it break even. When we looked at our ER data, we were getting killed on kids coming back for asthma. But now that we're under global budget, we get to save the money. And so if we think we can run the school health program better, we'll save all this money for the hospital. So that type of reasoning would never have been possible under a fee-for-service system. Western Maryland Health System in Allegheny County in Cumberland is a really, you go in there, it's the quietest hospital you've ever seen. I call it the anti-gravity zone for healthcare. Like it gives you like disorientation. So quiet. And you go to the ER, every patient gets seen by a special team that tries to tuck them in so they never have to come back. This is not a hospital that has only 2 minutes waiting on the highway. It's the opposite. In fact, the CEO who'd been there before and after the transformation said, it's been the most amazing thing. It's a culture shift across all payers. We're now really trying to keep people healthy and out of the hospital. They send nurses out to long-term care facilities when they discharge patients. And he said, it's almost like we have signs up that say, we never want to see you again here, which is not typically how people have done business. The governor puts it that this is an example, we're not paying hospitals like hotels anymore. That's how he puts it. And you can see that there's a dramatically better rate of reductions in readmissions and avoidable admissions in the hospitals that had that financial incentive. And for a while, I was getting calls from different reporters, and every reporter that called me, I said, if you want a great story in healthcare, go out to Cumberland, talk to Western Maryland. And, I finally got a guy from the New York Times to go out, Eduardo Porter, and he went out and he wrote this great story about what was going on in Maryland. So we have made this deal. The essential elements are that we will transition entirely away from fee-for-service medicine in the Maryland's hospital system for all payers over 5 years. The global budget cap that I talked about is tied to the state growth of the economy, not to anything else. And we've guaranteed certain savings to Medicare that we think we can get at the same time. And we're also, we've built in and negotiated very strong requirements for quality and patient experience as well. So the goal is to fundamentally change how the hospitals are paid, and in the process really orient the enormous healthcare system, or at least 40% of it, to be thinking about health as opposed to just services. And then our next step is to, what I call the hospital waiver. The hospital approach is necessary but not sufficient. Sufficient for better health is all the community and primary care work that needs to happen. If you don't have the hospital part, the hospital part eats up so much of the healthcare budget. It's very hard to get resources for the other work that needs to happen. When you reorient the hospital part, where they're incentivized now to do things like take over the school health program or see fewer admissions for different problems, then if you can really strengthen and support community health and primary care, everything can be aligned and you can get some progress. Our goal is to develop a process where primary care is strong in Maryland, and primary care doctors aren't paid just at the 7.5-minute intervals. And at the same time, they can rely on community health for support, for different indirect help for their patients, but also to be analyzing the root causes of disease in their community and intervening in strategic ways. We have a data infrastructure for this, including the CRISPS system, which even though it was designed to be able to look up patients in different places, we're able to actually develop real-time maps of preventable admissions and readmissions, really all the way down to, this is, I think, by census tract, but we could actually, this is not real data, but you can actually go all the way down to the block level if you need to understand. So if you wanted to say, one day we will see the graph in real time of where asthma admissions are coming from for community health agencies to be able to really identify what may be happening environmentally or other ways to intervene, and to have that working in concert with primary care and the hospital system. So that's where we're headed. So I'll back up and say where I started, each of these is different. The fun part, I think, is realizing that they're different and not applying a cookie-cutter approach to the different challenges. There are tools, and you've got to be strategic about the tools that you're using. On all these things, I think every time, I'll say this because I relive this even today, when there's a debate about whether to jump out and wrestle a particular problem down and take ownership of it and say what you're doing, you could be successful. And not doing that, maybe you get away with it, but generally speaking, it comes back to bite you. I remember on the healthcare costs, we went to the governor and we said, we want to write a piece that, costs in Maryland are too high and we can do a lot better. And, a lot of people would have the reaction, because I work with them, saying, well, you shouldn't, that's just a terrible issue to take on. Don't talk about really that kind of bad news issue, that then people are going to expect you to do something. The governor didn't feel that way. I mean, he hears from businesses and others about healthcare. And then when we jumped out, we have become the voice of, well, what can we do about the cost of healthcare, instead of why aren't you doing anything about the cost of healthcare? And so we have credibility on that. So I do think, even though I've picked sort of different examples, there's some themes about the need to be able to fill the space with a clear and understandable approach, to use the tools that you have, and then to look for opportunities in the various challenges that are going on for additional progress against some of the underlying things that you're trying to change. So I will stop there, thanking all the people who helped me put all this together, and maybe see if there are any questions, comments, arguments from anyone. Thank you.
So let me ask, so I guess, is this being webcast? So we have to use these? Video.
Okay.
So everybody has to use the mic for, so maybe somebody can go over there and get the mic. Let me ask the first question. So how did you convince the hospitals to move to global budgeting?
So I think that it was a combination of things. I wouldn't say it was how did we convince the hospitals, but how did the hospitals get to realize that was a really good idea? And I think it came from a couple things. One is that, as I said, there were challenges with the current payment system. That the current payment system was so much based on fee-for-service, and in order to succeed in fee-for-service, you have to get increases in your fees. But the rules under which the system was operating really wouldn't allow for increases in fees. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some of the things that the hospitals were doing to be innovative, such as reducing, like the hospitals that were on global budgets, if you went, using my example, from 10 admissions at $10 per admission to 5 admissions at 20, you might say, well, the healthcare has gotten better, but the price per admission has gone from 10 to 20. Mm-hmm. And so that actually disadvantaged Maryland under the rules that we were operating under. So they were very worried that they would lose the system that they had on the trajectory that we were on. And so then, so that's just the fear part, but you have to actually have the hope part. And the hope part was really that these hospitals that have crossed the bridge into global budget, they're like some of the happiest CEOs you'll see in the hospital world. They had other ways to make money. There's now a new business stream, and that business stream is in keeping people healthier and, you know, getting some margin out of being paid on a capitated or population basis. So it took a while. I think there were some changes, you know, for the hospitals to feel that this was something that they could succeed in. And I think that there's some variation across the hospitals, but at a certain point, a critical mass said, we're just not going to be successful the old way anymore, and this is our chance to try to do something different. And I'll tell you, John Colmers, who works over here at Hopkins, is the chair of the commission. He and I did, you know, dozens of public appearances about this, and I used to say, I would always start and I'd say, my dad's a psychiatrist, and he divides the world into two parts: pain avoiding and pleasure seeking, okay? John will be representing pain avoiding in this meeting, and I will be representing pleasure seeking. And John would say, we're in big trouble under the trends and this and that, and we're gonna, you know, all these horrible things are gonna happen. And I would say, like, we can make Maryland healthier, we can, you know, we can do all these great things, and, you know, eventually a combination of those two messages, I think, probably helped. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us beautifully. I have a concern about the issue of nosocomial infections, and to a lesser degree, iatrogenic infections. The issue that I first became aware of during my time at FDA and the Center for Devices and Radiological Health was issues related to the use of certain devices and the procedures, the use and reuse of devices, and so on. There seems to be an effort at this point to control costs with not reimbursing for readmissions associated with infections. At the same time, some facilities that do have an occasional infection are the ones that are doing the riskier procedures, and oftentimes with patients who are less healthy and that the condition is much more progressed. Is there some point at which infection control runs out of not being reimbursed for readmissions?
Well, there are two things to say there. Let me just talk for a second about Maryland, then maybe I'll address a concern that you're raising. In Maryland, you have the hospitals that are on a pure global budget. So if you're essentially a global budget, for those hospitals, any admission cuts against their global budget. So they have a big incentive not to have readmissions. But even today, even Hopkins has negotiated essentially a global budget for readmissions. And the way that basically works is, and most of the hospitals in Maryland have this if they're not on the full global budget. Last year, you had $100 in readmissions. This year, we'll give you $100, but you have to pay for all the readmissions. So that then changes the incentives to help people realize, wait a second, if I can cut down on readmissions, then I can actually keep a fair amount of this money. So there's a lot of the innovation going on in Maryland as a result of the readmission incentive. Now, there are a couple ways to do the penalties, and this is getting to your point. The national approach to penalties is to say, here's one line, we expect hospitals to hit this line. If you don't hit this line, then you get a certain penalty. In Maryland, we've done it a little differently. And that penalty is X amount of money, or X% or something like that. What we're saying is you basically are getting a global budget that's based on your previous expenditures. And then everything is really at risk, and you have a huge amount of money that you can potentially succeed at if you do a good job. And so a hospital that, for example, has a lot of readmissions under the Maryland approach is getting a bigger amount up front against which then they can save money than a hospital that has a smaller number of readmissions. So it's a different approach than kind of the national approach, which might set a one particular number for readmission and expect that to be the benchmark. So I think it's fair. Now let me, I did a grand rounds once, and my mom was in the audience, and usually I say when my mom's in the audience, you know, please ask as aggressive questions as you want, but I just want you to know my mom is in the audience. You know, so I did that day, and so I thought, you know, no one's gonna ask me any tough questions. This one person got up. I don't want to be held accountable for the care that you know, my patients, I'm a pediatrician, I take care of these brittle asthmatics. I can't get them to take their medicines. I can't get them to do something, and suddenly I'm going to be penalized if they have readmissions. That's horrible. I can't think of a worse way of doing it. And I said, well, I tried to say this a couple ways, but I said, well, it's based on the number of admissions you have at baseline. We're not expecting perfection. We're just saying now if you can do more and invest in different things and you can get their readmissions down, that's the general approach, then you should be able to share in those savings. And she came back with, I'm never going to get their readmissions down. You don't understand these patients. You just, and I said, yeah, right. And what I said to the group was, you know, maybe there's another doctor who thinks they can get your patients a little better, you know, and then there was like this murmur in the room. And I said, well, you know, I mean, you know, like that's the point here. We want to get the patients better. And maybe there's someone who wants to take on those difficult cases and wants to go at risk for that. And, you know, the whole idea is not that it's an unfair incentive, but that there is some ability to invest in things that can actually keep people healthy and do better.
But she's not at risk for pro fees. It's the hospital that's at risk.
Right. She would be, she was sort of kind of extrapolating to her case.
So we have a couple other, so somebody in the back has a mic there.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sharfstein, for your talk. I have a quick clarifying question and then another question. So in terms of tying the global payments to the economy in Maryland, the growth state product, is that tied directly to the gross state product, or is it a fixed percentage on top of the gross state product? And if it's
the way it works exactly is it's based on the rolling 10-year average. So we set for the first 3 years, it would be 3.58% based on the previous 10 years of GSP growth. So each year, 3.58% would be the cap of all payer growth in Maryland. We think Medicare will grow less than that because of demographic shifts.
Congratulations on what you're achieving. One of the things that I think I'm not hearing, though, is that hospitals are not getting a lot of input from public health as to what would be the best things they could do to keep people out of the hospital. So they're relying on their own emergency room data, you know, which might tell them, okay, if you can keep asthmatics home,
Right.
that's great. But they're not hearing things like the public health numbers have proven, such as that increasing the breastfeeding rate might be a great way to keep babies healthy. Or that you know, changing school bell times might make adolescents healthier. And these are things that aren't going to occur unless there's some kind of advisory route that
Sure.
that they can hear about that kind of data.
So couple good question. I'd say that some of the biggest challenges we face are cultural, sociological, and on both sides. You know, I had one hospital executive said to me, every day in my 40-year career as a hospital executive, I wake up in the morning, I get dressed, I go to work, I walk through the cafeteria, and I know whether we're having a good day or not by the number of people who are in the cafeteria. And now with this readmission stuff and all this, I don't know whether they're readmissions, I don't know who's in the hospital, I gotta retire, you know? So there's a cultural shift, a cultural need for a cultural shift on the hospital side for people to think about what goes on outside the hospital, you know, how there are, and you can find CEOs who are so knowledgeable about every little detail of their operation, who can show up at a meeting and say, do you have any idea, Josh, that the chronically mentally ill keep coming back to the ER. When we looked at our ER numbers, it's blowing our minds. You know, it's like, well, that's what happens, you know, and to have hospital CEOs really seeing some of those shifts is just amazing, and they're just getting into it, and they're adapting at different levels. But I think there's a parallel message also to the public health field. Public health field has been often, you know, we just do our thing, just give us the resources, we'll run the campaign, and that's it. And I think there, you know, the money is drying up tremendously for that approach, or very quickly. And it's going to be necessary for public health to be oriented more towards the healthcare system, just like the healthcare system more oriented towards public health. How do you actually do that? I think that we hope that the local health action coalitions that we've set up and the platform that we've created technologically will bring a lot of people together and have a lot of ideas percolate locally. It's very hard for me to mandate things, but if the Garrett County health officer and the Garrett County, you know, hospital team, who is on the board of the hospital, you know, can come up with something that, you know, that works for them. When I meet with federal officials, they always ask, you know, what they can do, and my answer is always 2 words: matching grants. I think that there is a tremendous need for matching grants. So where the hospital, say, or the ACO or the physician practice or someone with a new type of health incentive gets matched in their investment outside the walls, because they're scared to make that investment. They'll think about recapitulating that function within their own organization. You know, pull it outside. If you're getting 2 to 1 to work with a public health group to really get the smoking stuff out there so you can reduce the number of heart attacks in your ER, you give it a try, you know, and then you evaluate what happens. And I think the places that are really going to succeed are the ones that are able to pull off that and not try to, you know, either be standoffish on the public health side or try to recapitulate everything on the. And I don't want to speak too much on this, but evidence of the divide is in the different meanings of one term, population health. So when the public health side thinks of population health, we think of a population, generally a geographically defined population. What is the health of this population of people? But oftentimes when the healthcare system talks about it, they're talking about enrollees. So let's have a population health strategy for the people who are enrolled right now in our insurance plan. It's puts you in a very different position. So you've got to kind of bring those together. One of the most exciting things about the Maryland waiver is that, because the hospitals are physical presences, you can kind of align the payment sense of population health with the actual public health sense of population health.
Hi, Josh. I have well, I'm very impressed with this data that you're showing here, and I feel like in some respects it needs to be published and widely disseminated. And so I guess my first question is, are you planning to do that, or do you have enough evidence right now that you actually have bent the cost curve in order to save money for Maryland? And I guess the second aspect is that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities. I think you just sort of touched on this for public health, as you said, as more hospitals start seeing community-based care as where they should be going to try to reduce readmissions. So is there some type of effort in the state of Maryland to try to fund public health students and graduates to be in, you know, implementing those type of public health programs?
2 really good questions. We published a paper about the Maryland waiver in the New England Journal and the new approach, but we don't, you know, it started in January, so we don't have data. So it'll be a little while before we're publishing the outcomes. Even the health enterprise zones are about a year in, so it's just sort of getting going. The second question is workforce. It's an incredibly important workforce issue for public health for a few reasons. A lot of the, you know, old funding streams are drying up, and so public health has to do something differently. And in the meantime, there's this incredible opportunity where the rest of the healthcare world is starting to look at true population health by whatever definition they mean. And I know that the Hopkins, I think it's under this related part of the School of Public Health, has some new training efforts to help train doctors to think more in this way, or other executives. I think it's going to be an increasingly important part of education of public health students. I think it would be, they're really, even from a workforce perspective, they're pretty, you know, different ground up workforces. People show up in hospital administration probably through the business path, and then public health administration through public health schools. And I do think that there's going to be a real opportunity for education around this, and the right model hasn't really been worked out. I mean, or the most prevalent models. It is very, very different. Even the payment, mechanisms are very different, whether it's physician-based in some communities or hospital-based in others. I think that right now, because of this crisis, and there's just an incredible amount of change, and I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for public health schools to help and for students to have really interesting careers in this area.
So why don't we take one more, and then we're going to have a reception outside where we can talk to Josh, and there's going to be a raffle out there where you can win prizes.
That's right. Yeah, all right, I guess if we're being videotaped, I can't make that joke, but I'll try, I'll say that you can win the chance to oversee the new Maryland Medicare waiver. Yeah.
I just had a quick question then on your whole new approach. How would you discourage a hospital from just meeting your metrics, in other words, reducing admissions by not readmitting, versus actual addressing community health?
Right, so good question. The first 10 pilot hospitals are rural hospitals. They're relatively isolated. It's very hard to not admit people or send people way away without somebody figuring it out. And they're getting very good data so that they're able to look at admission and referral patterns and see that they're not changing. That gets more complicated, in addition to measuring quality and other things in the hospital. And we also get, inter-hospital readmission data. So we can see whether you're sending your readmission somewhere else. You can't, hide from that. But it gets more complicated. I mean, and there are issues that, and in fact, our waiver application, everything has a whole section devoted to the different kinds of monitoring that has to be done. But then it gets more tricky when you get to a city where there are a number of big hospitals. You can't just do a global budget, because then, if you go on yellow alert more, suddenly you're making, more money. And so it probably a pure global budget approach is not going to work for an urban environment. So there are different types of approaches. The reason it's going to take us 5 years is we're going to be piloting and working on, and the commission that oversees this is going to be working on different types of payment structures. But I'll give you an example of one that has been contemplated for urban areas. Imagine if a certain hospital went at risk for zip codes in its shadow. What I mean by that is, let's say today, 80% of the admissions come into that hospital's ER. 20% go to a different hospital system. Maybe 80% go to 2 of the hospitals that are nearby in the same, hospital system, and 20% go across town to some other hospital. The commission might make a deal with that hospital that is right there in the community and say, you're at, last year it was $100 for all the hospital costs for these zip codes. We'll give you $100 next year, and you pay. Whether they come to you or whether they go somewhere else, we're going to deduct it from that $100. So that creates you can't push anybody anywhere. Wherever they show up, you're paying. So that would put the hospital in a position to say, okay, let's make it happen in this community. Let's put the community health worker structures in. Let's reach out. Let's figure out what's going on. And if they, and they're getting the credit, they're getting the dividends if they can lower volume, even if that volume would have gone somewhere else. So that's a harder way to run around by just pushing it somewhere else, because it's all from that zip code. So that's how I think about it. But there are other ways to do it too, and there are different types of adjustments that can be applied. So there's a whole part of our the discussion with some of the faculty at Hopkins is to help out, I think, developing some of those models.
So I've lost the mic, but I'll just go on. So I have not been, texting. I have been tweeting, and so you can go to my Twitter page and see what I thought of your talk, because I thought it was a great talk. And some of these things that you make seem so simple are really hard. And the fact that you've been able to explain them so well and to have operational ways to carry out things that people have been struggling with for a long time, it's really remarkable. So I want to invite everybody out to the raffle,
Sure.
and hope you can stay and talk to folks. And I think I speak for everybody from Maryland, but probably people from other states who have been health commissioners. say thank you for your service and your leadership. So.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
nice. Okay.